In this video, we're going to look at the rock cycle. If you remember from when we talked about minerals, a rock is an aggregate of minerals. So when you have multiple minerals within one thing, that's a rock. Now, we're going to look at the different rock types. Now, these different rock types are classified based on how they form. So their formation history is what makes each of them different. All right, for instance, first we have igneous rocks. Now, igneous rocks form from the freezing of molten rock. So you have magma when it's underground or lava when it's at the surface. They're pretty much interchangeable though. They mean exactly the same thing. So the magma goes through cooling and crystallization and you get an igneous rock. We also have sedimentary rocks. Now these form from the cementing of fragments of broken pre-existing rocks or by the precipitation of mineral crystals out of a water solution. So you start with sediments, and that's those broken pieces of rock, or in some cases it can be the dissolved ions in water. And all of that is deposited and lithified. Lithification is just the process where sediment becomes a mineral or a rock, and that gives you a sedimentary rock. And finally, we have metamorphic rocks. Metamorphic rocks are going to form when pre-existing rocks change in response to a change in their environment, such as the temperature or pressure or the chemical environment, which in this case is going to mean fluids. Now the thing to remember about these is sort of where this material comes from. So in order to get magma over here, we need things to melt. So what can you melt? Can you melt a metamorphic rock? Of course, it's actually pretty easy as long as it gets hot enough. And that's the key to metamorphic is it's got to get hot enough to melt, but once it gets hot enough to melt, it's not metamorphic anymore. Can you melt a sedimentary rock? They melt just the same. What about an igneous rock? That's already made from melted stuff. You can remelt it back down. So you can melt a metamorphic rock, an igneous rock, or a sedimentary rock to make a new igneous rock. Well, those sediments for a sedimentary rock, where did those come from? That's because of a process called weathering. And erosion picks up those pieces and dumps them somewhere else. So that's where you get that deposition of sediments. Now, can you weather an igneous rock? Well, of course you can. Igneous rocks weather pretty easily, actually. What about a metamorphic rock? Can you weather it? It breaks down just the same. And what about sedimentary rocks? Well, you've done this in class and probably in lab already when you put hydrochloric acid on it. That's a weathering process in and of itself. So you can weather an igneous, a metamorphic, or a sedimentary rock to create a new sedimentary rock. Now this heat, pressure, and fluids. Can you add heat and pressure to an igneous rock? Yeah, pretty easily. What about sedimentary rocks? That happens too. Well, what about a metamorphic rock? Of course, you can add heat, pressure, and fluids to all of those. So you can take a metamorphic rock, an igneous rock, or a sedimentary rock and make it into a new metamorphic rock. So hopefully what you can see in this process then is, for one, all the rocks are constantly changing. And this is due to plate tectonics here on Earth. That's what's really driving most of these things. It causes melting, it causes heat and pressure, and it uplifts rocks and makes them so that they can weather. But really, if you think about it, the Earth has a finite amount of material. We don't gain much new material on Earth. We do get things like dust and meteorites from space, but it's a very small percentage of the entire Earth's volume. So really everything we've got is all we've got to work with. And considering there's new rocks formed everywhere constantly, that means you're just using up the old rocks. So to find an old rock on Earth is actually pretty hard because they're constantly being recycled. There are places like South Africa, parts of India, and Canada that do have really old rocks. But there's places with really young rocks like Hawaii and the Pacific Northwest of the United States, or even along river channels when the river floods and mud has been deposited behind it. Those are all places where new rocks are being formed.